Yeah, this is a 100% real story, and right now in the real estate market you have to know. We spend our whole lives looking for safety. That is the American dream, isn't it? You work hard, you save your money. You find a nice town with good schools and clean streets. You find a house with a big yard and a strong lock on the front door. You tell yourself that once you cross that threshold, the world can't hurt you anymore. Inside these walls, you are the king. Inside these walls, you are safe. But what happens when the walls themselves turn against you? What happens when the safety you bought becomes a cage? We like to think that when we buy a house, we are just buying wood and stone. We think we are buying an empty box that we can fill with our own lives. But houses have eyes. Houses have histories. And sometimes, houses have guardians. This is the story of a dream that turned into a nightmare. This is the story of a family who did everything right, and a stranger who watched them from the shadows. Welcome to 657 Boulevard. To understand why this happened, you have to understand the town. Westfield, New Jersey. It is the kind of place you see in movies. It is perfect. It is quiet. It is only 45 minutes from New York City, but it feels like a different world. The lawns are manicured. The streets are lined with old, tall trees that block out the sun. The people who live there are wealthy, successful, and private. In Westfield, your house is your status. And 657 Boulevard was one of the best. It was a grand house, a Dutch colonial built in 1905. It sat on a wide street, pulling your eye towards it. It had 6 bedrooms, 4 fireplaces. It was huge, almost 4,000 square feet. It was the kind of house where you could raise a generation of children. It was the kind of house that commanded respect. In 2014, Derek and Maria Broadus bought it. They were a normal couple. Derek worked in insurance. Maria stayed home with their 3 young children. They had worked hard to get to this point. They weren't billionaires. They were just people who wanted the best for their kids. They paid $1.3 million for the house. It was a stretch, but it was worth it. They closed the deal in June. The summer was just starting. The sun was warm. The future looked bright. They didn't move in right away. They wanted to fix it up first. They wanted to paint the walls, sand the floors, make it perfect. They spent their days at the house working, laughing, dreaming about where the Christmas tree would go. 3 days after they closed the sale, Derek was at the house. It was evening. He was painting. He went out to check the mail. Inside the mailbox, there was a white, card-shaped envelope. It was thick. It felt heavy in his hand. On the front, someone had typed a message in a clunky, messy font. It didn't have a return address. It just said, "To the new owner." Derek opened it. He probably thought it was a welcome note. Maybe a neighbor inviting them to a barbecue. Maybe a note about garbage pickup days. He unfolded the letter, and as he read, the air in the house seemed to drop 10 degrees. The letter began warmly, but strange. It said, "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." It seemed polite. But then, the tone shifted. It became possessive. It became dark. The letter continued. "How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force from within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out." Derek stood there on the porch. The sun was going down. The street was quiet. He looked around. He saw the big houses next door. He saw the trees swaying in the wind. Suddenly, the street didn't look perfect anymore. It looked like a stage, and he was the actor being watched. But the letter wasn't done. The writer had been watching closely. Very closely. The writer knew about the renovations. They knew Derek had contractors inside. The letter said, "I see that you have flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be." Tsk, tsk, tsk. Bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy. And then, the writer turned their attention to the most terrifying thing of all. The children, Derek and Maria, had 3 kids. They were young. They ran around the yard. They laughed. To a normal person, that is a happy sight. To the writer of this letter, it was something else. It was fuel. The letter asked, "You have children. I have seen them. In the past, I have counted 3. Have you filled the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me." Young blood. That phrase changes everything. It isn't just a cranky neighbor complaining about noise. It is predatory. It is hungry. The letter was signed with a name that would become a legend in New Jersey. It wasn't signed with a human name. It was signed, The Watcher. Derek ran inside. He turned off the lights. He called the police. The police arrived. They read the letter. They were disturbed. They asked Derek if he had enemies. Derek said no. He was just a guy who bought a house. The police told him to take down the "for sale" sign that was still in the yard. They said it might be attracting attention. Derek asked them what he should do. They told him to keep his eyes open. Derek and Maria didn't move in. How could they? How could you put your children to bed in a house where someone was waiting for young blood? They stayed at their old house, but they still owned 657. They were trapped. They started an investigation. They hired private detectives. They hired former FBI agents. They needed to know who was watching them. They looked at the neighbors. In a neighborhood this old, people stay for generations. Next door lived the Langfords. They were a bit eccentric. The mother was elderly. One of the sons, Michael, lived at home. He was described by other neighbors as a bit odd, a Boo Radley-type character. People said he walked through the backyards. People said he peeked in windows. Derek became obsessed. He would sit in the dark house looking out the windows, watching the neighbors watch him. He watched Michael Langford. Was it him? Was he the one writing about young blood? But the police couldn't find proof. They couldn't match the DNA. They interviewed Michael, but he denied it. The pieces didn't fit perfectly. Weeks passed. The Broaddus family was bleeding money. They were paying the mortgage on a mansion they were too scared to sleep in. They were paying for their old home. They were paying for detectives. And then, the second letter arrived. If the first letter was an introduction, the second letter was a threat. The Watcher was angry. The Watcher had noticed that the family hadn't moved in yet. The Watcher was impatient. The letter said, "Welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard. The workers have been busy, and I have been watching you unload carfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster's a nice touch. Have they found what is in the walls yet? In time they will." What is in the walls? It is a question that eats at your mind. Is it a body? Is it money? Is it nothing? It is designed to make you tear your own house apart. But then, the Watcher proved just how close they were. The letter started listing the children by their nicknames, names that Derek and Maria only used inside their family. The Watcher knew which child slept in which bedroom. The letter said, "I am pleased to know your names now and the name of the young blood you have brought to me. Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream." Imagine reading that. Imagine holding a piece of paper that tells you in detail how your children could disappear in your own home. The Watcher went on. He, or she, talked about the windows and doors. "All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house." Who am I? I am the Watcher and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Broaddus family stopped bringing the children to the house entirely. They stopped renovations. The house sat empty, but a house that big doesn't stay quiet. Rumors started to spread in Westfield. People noticed the lights were never on. People noticed the moving trucks never came. The secret got out, and here is where the story gets even darker. Not because of the letter writer, but because of the town. You would think the neighbors would help. You would think the town would rally around a young family being terrorized. But Westfield is a town of image, and the Broaddus family was ruining the image. The neighbors started to whisper. They said Derek was making it up. They said he had buyer's remorse. They said he realized he couldn't afford the house and was writing the letters himself to get out of the sale. Think about the isolation. You are being hunted by a stranger, and the people around you think you are the villain. Derek and Maria were desperate. They decided they had to sell. 6 months after buying the house of their dreams, they put it back on the market. They listed it for more than they paid, trying to recoup the money they spent on renovations. But the rumors were out. Nobody wanted to buy the Watcher house. The letters were now public knowledge. Who would bring their children into a house where a stalker was waiting for young blood? The house sat on the market. The price dropped, and dropped, and dropped. While they tried to sell, Derek continued his own investigation. He was becoming paranoid. He looked at everyone. He looked at the gamer. There was a young woman who parked her car on the street late at night. The police traced her. It turned out her boyfriend lived on the block. It was a dead end. He looked at the couple behind the house. They sat in lawn chairs facing 657 Boulevard. It seemed suspicious, but it turned out they were just nosy neighbors. Every lead turned into smoke. The Watcher was a ghost. They had no fingerprints. The DNA on the envelope was female, but it didn't match anyone in the neighborhood. The police were stumped. A year passed. 2 years. The house was still empty. Derek and Maria were drowning in debt. They came up with a new plan. If they couldn't sell the house, maybe they could destroy it. They applied to the town for permission to bulldoze 657 Boulevard. They wanted to tear it down, split the lot in two, and build 2 smaller normal houses. They thought this would solve the problem. The Watcher was obsessed with the house. If the house was gone, the Watcher would have nothing to watch. But the town of Westfield fought back. The neighbors were furious. They didn't care about the safety of the Broaddus family. They cared about the character of the neighborhood. They didn't want 2 small houses ruining the look of the street. They held a town council meeting. It was brutal. The neighbors stood up and shouted at Derek. They accused him of trying to ruin their property values. They voted against him. The permission was denied. The house had to stay. And then, the Watcher wrote again. This time the letter was violent. The Watcher was angry that they tried to change the house. The Watcher was angry that they tried to leave. The 3rd letter said, "Violent winds and bitter cold. To the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife Maria." You wonder who the Watcher is? Turn around, idiots. Maybe you even spoke to me, one of the so-called neighbors who has no idea who the Watcher could be. Or maybe you do know and are too scared to tell anyone. Good move. The letter became specific about physical harm. It threatened to burn the house down. It threatened to harm them in their sleep. Maybe a car accident. Maybe a fire. Maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away but makes you feel sick day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious death of a pet. Loved ones suddenly die. Planes and cars and bicycles crash. Bones break. It was a curse. It was a promise of pain. Derek and Maria realized they would never live there. They moved in with family. They rented the house out to a brave tenant who didn't care about the letters, but the Watcher didn't stop. 2 weeks after the renter moved in, another letter arrived. It was even more unhinged. It threatened the renter's life. The renter moved out immediately. Finally, in 2019, 5 years after they bought the house, the nightmare ended, at least financially. Derek and Maria sold 657 Boulevard. They bought it for $1.3 million. They sold it for $959,000. They lost almost $500,000. The new owners moved in. The town held its breath. Everyone waited for a new letter. Everyone waited for the Watcher to introduce themselves to the new young blood. But the letters stopped. The new owners have been there for years. They haven't received a single note. It is quiet. The house is just a house again. So, what happened? There are theories. Some say it was a neighbor who was jealous. Someone who wanted the house for themselves but couldn't afford it, so they tormented anyone else who bought it. Some say it was a neighbor who hated the renovations. Someone who was obsessed with the history of the house and couldn't stand seeing a new family change it. Some say it was Michael Langford, the eccentric man next door. He died a few years later, and the letters stopped around the time his health failed. But there was never any proof, and some people, the cynical ones, still whisper that Derek and Maria did it themselves. But why would they destroy their own life? Why would they lose $500,000 just for a story? It doesn't make sense. The most terrifying theory is the simplest one. The watcher is still there. Maybe they are just waiting. Maybe they didn't like the Broaddus family specifically. Or maybe they achieved their goal. They wanted to show that they had power. They wanted to show that money can't buy safety. 657 Boulevard still sits on that quiet street in Westfield. The lawn is green. The paint is fresh. It looks perfect. But if you walk by it at night, and you look up at the dark windows, you can't help but wonder. Is someone standing behind the glass? We assume our homes are private. We assume that when we lock the door, the world is locked out. But 657 Boulevard teaches us a different lesson. You can buy the land. You can buy the wood and the stone. But you can never buy the eyes that are watching you from the darkness. Sometimes the house doesn't belong to you. Sometimes you are just a guest, and the watcher is always watching. So, sleep tight.